Whether it's a hot time in Florida or a rainy night in Georgia,
looking for trouble?
It's the perfect time for the TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis fan podcast.
Oh, yes, sir. Good to see you open up. This Black Fix bring you the hottest thing in the country. Real hot and blue. Coming to WHBQ in Memphis, Tennessee.
With your hosts, Justin Gosman and Gurdip Ladar. The TCBcast is on the air.
Welcome to TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis Presley fan podcast. I'm Justin Gosman.
I'm Gurdip Ladar.
Gurdip, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to be back in the saddle again.
Yes, indeed. It's been a little while, although you and I got together a couple days ago, and over on our Patreon, we just did a bonus episode on Buddy Holly and the Crickets' first album, The Chirping Crickets.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun to revisit some of Holly's tracks that don't always come up in my rotation. So that was really good. And to talk about Buddy Holly was nice because I don't think we have in a while.
Yeah, other than I think at the beginning of our second year, we did an episode on the day the music died. But other than that, not really. So yeah, it was a ton of fun to sit down with that album. Otherwise, it was kind of a busy week for Elvis news.
Yeah, it's a bunch of stuff.
Sofia Coppola is directing a new biopic about Priscilla Presley, also based on Elvis and Me, which had previously been adapted into a made-for-TV biopic back in the 80s. But it's being remade, essentially, and she's writing and directing. It's going to be distributed in North America by A24. And
Sony, right?
Yeah, yep. And it's expected to film in Toronto, starting, I think, sometime later this year or early next year. But they announced the two lead roles. They have Kaylee Spaney as Priscilla and Jacob Elordi as Elvis. What do you think of this?
Never heard of either of those two individuals, but I don't know. The timing is kind of odd. Obviously, it's not going to be out right away. I'm thinking 2 years. Maybe a year and a half. Obviously, they're trying to, capture that Baz Luhrmann Elvis magic again. I don't know. Sure, the actual original material, it's been a while since it's been touched. I mean, made-for-TV film doesn't really count because that was such a long time ago. I don't know. I don't know what's going to be the spin on this. Are they going to try to make Elvis look bad? Are they going to dig into that whole thing of how old Priscilla was when they first met? Is he going to come out looking worse than how he did in this new film? What do you think? Will this have the EPE backing?
We don't know that. As far as I understand, Priscilla still had the rights for her book, and we knew, given the fact that she went in this just recently and did a new audiobook version that she narrated. So I'm sure that it was part of, a Priscilla deal to sell the movie rights, which, it's her life. She can tell her story, sell it to whoever she wants, same as anyone else around Elvis has done or wants to do. But I felt the timing was so inappropriate, given the movie is still probably going to be release-wise a couple years out. There is plenty of time, and this was announced on practically the same week. Well, it was literally the same week that Baz Luhrmann's Elvis was released on home media, like DVD and Blu-ray and ultra high def Blu-ray. And with the success of certainly the success of Baz's movie is probably part of the reason why her movie got greenlit. But it has the stink of kind of money grabbing. Even if it was in pre-production before, if she's been working on the script for a while, just kind of running in parallel with Baz's film, it just doesn't feel good. And I think a lot of people had that same reaction. I'm open to, I guess, again, they can do what they want, but to me, I don't feel like Priscilla's story is all that interesting anymore. It's been explored so many times and in so many different ways. And, you only have to look at the discourse around Baz Luhrmann's Elvis to know that everybody knows that story. So, and everybody already has an opinion. I don't think that making a movie about it is going to change anyone's opinion, good or bad, either way. You know, Priscilla and Elvis have been around for 60 years, like that whole relationship. So people are not going to, I think, dramatically change their opinion based on one movie of, you know, what that relationship was or how it went down or whatever, especially if it does remain as faithful to her book as even the 80s version was. Because, like, for whatever criticisms people have had about the 80s movie, it was relatively faithful to her book.
I'm just wondering, like, so if it is essentially endorsed by her, I'm sure they're not going to get into anything torrid in the actual film. Now, they could make a film about Elvis and Priscilla without...
She did endorse the 80s movie, and that did the same thing.
Yeah, but that was a bit different, I think.
I
think since years have passed, her stance has kind of changed. You know that. It's changed.
Yeah.
One, do they need her permission to make a film about her and Elvis? They really don't.
No, she's a public figure. They're just, it's the getting the rights to her life story through the book. Yeah, the book.
So I'm thinking if they don't have her on board, they can do whatever they want. And I think Elvis is going to be much maligned. But if it is based on the book and they have her blessing, and if she's a producer, then I think it'll be a bit safer. Obviously, she's not going to do anything. I mean, that's her daughter's father, so I think she's going to be a bit more mindful of that. But we'll see. We don't know very many details. Coppola, what do you think of her? Is she? I mean, I know she was. I haven't had much experience with her. I know she was in Godfather 3, and she wasn't very good in that. But she has directed films. Have you seen anything of hers that was really good? I think she got acclaim for something. I'm not sure what.
I had seen a couple of. Lost in Translation was the big one.
That was it.
With Bill Murray.
Bill Murray, yeah.
Yeah, and that one was really good. And I remember seeing the Marie Antoinette film with Kirsten Dunst back in the 2000s, and that's all that I've seen of her films. I haven't explored her more recent films, but they've been a lot, more low key. She's doing these more, kind of mid-budget type films and just exploring things creatively that she wants to do rather than, trying to do what a studio really wants her to do, which I can respect.
It'll be interesting because you saw Lisa Marie and Riley and all of them. They were all worried about the new Baz film, and then it's like such a relief for them that it was what they wanted it to be. So I'm curious how they would react to this.
Yeah. Well, we don't. In all the articles that I saw, it didn't indicate anything in terms of Authentic Brands Group. The company that owns the rights to Elvis's likeness in terms of marketing and publicity. Now, obviously, he's an historical figure as well, so people can just use Elvis. Like they don't have to get EPE/Authentic Brands permission, but it helped in terms of getting the likeness, using the original music, music publishing. We don't know if Jacob Elordi is going to do any of the singing. Like nothing. If there's going to be any singing, there may not be any music at all.
What's Roddy McDowell doing?
Yeah.
Anything? Once more what's that Shakespeare quote? Once more to the breach, dear friends, or whatever.
Now, of course, like already people are talking about, even with the Austin film, people were like, "Oh, well, they could, they don't look enough, he doesn't look enough like Elvis." And then you've got people on the other side going, "Oh, they can deep fake him." And we have another thing. I
don't think that technology is there yet.
And proof in the pudding that that's not technologically there yet is what happened on America's Got Talent this week.
Yeah, you showed me. Send me this clip.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's yours an honor to be here with y'all on America's Got Talent. I'd like to thank Tom, Chris, and Metaphysic for having me here tonight. I have to tell you, we're going to do a couple of our biggest records for you now. And this first one is a tender love song. And as a great philosopher once said,
you ain't nothing but a hound dog, yeah. Crossing on time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, yeah.
What do you think of this?
Initially, I was like, "What is this?" And then I was like, "Oh, okay, it's just like a little fun thing that they're doing on that show." But Yeah, the voice. Oh wow, it was not good. The singing voice. I mean, the Elvis looked okay, the screen, but they were, from what you told me, they were faking it. It wasn't even live, was it?
So yeah, the company Metaphysic, they're an AI tech company. They've been competing on America's Got Talent, kind of showcasing their uses of both deepfake technology and also a technology called Respeecher. And this is something that Respeecher is a way of synthesizing speaking voices from a library of phonetic sounds sampled from real speech. This is something that was done by, in fact, using the same application. Disney had done that with Mark Hamill's voice in the episodes of the Book of Boba Fett, and also in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. The voice of Darth Vader was sampled from old James Earl Jones clips and made to create new dialogue. And so the technology itself is nothing new. It was that their application of it was, we're going to basically pretend that a live impersonator of whoever, because on this specific episode for the grand finale competition, they brought out an Elvis tribute artist by the name of Emilio Santoro to basically play the role of Elvis live on stage and provide the singing voice. And then at the beginning, when he steps out and introduces himself, he's basically lip syncing to a synthesized, which is why it sounds slightly off and some of the phrasing is not quite right. But it's a synthesized Elvis voice using real samples of Elvis's voice. Yeah. So that's why that sounded better, and that makes it even more jarring when you go into Emilio's impersonation on Hound Dog and Devil in Disguise, that it's just like, oh god, he doesn't sound anything at all like the real Elvis Presley.
You fool me with your kisses, you cheated and schemed. Heaven knows how you lied to me, not always. You look like an angel, walk like an angel, talk like an angel, but I got wise.
So, I mean, pulling the curtain back a little bit, show you the man behind the curtain. The way that the act was done was that the deepfake was pre-recorded that you saw on the screen. The cameras on stage were props. This was not a live processed deepfake. The technology is just not there for it to be to that quality. And you can tell if you go through in slow-mo, there are movements of the ETA on stage that are not synchronized and also not early, because I can hear people already saying, well, just because it's not synchronized doesn't mean anything, because there's obviously, if it was real-time, then there would be a delay, of a split second or whatever, how many, frames, for the computer to process. But it's literally like there are moments where the on-screen Elvis moves before the person on stage does, or has his arm pointed in a different direction than the one on stage. And so basically what you have is, I think they pre-recorded Emilio doing that, deepfaked Elvis's face onto him, and then had that synchronize up with a live vocal by Emilio. Yeah. Which is what you hear on the broadcast itself. And so I know how the trick is done, and I know there were a lot of people that were really excited about it. It just felt really skeevy to me, because here's why. The goal of America's Got Talent, let's just, what are your thoughts on talent shows like America's Got Talent? I'm curious. I mean,
initially when they started, like American Idol, it was kind of fun, but then it got kind of tiresome, and you're just like, it's kind of played out, the whole talent show thing, I think.
So
it's like Star Search, essentially, from back in the day.
So American Idol pretty much is a real talent show. Like back in the day, they go out to communities and they find actual singers. America's Got Talent is not a real talent competition. It is a platform for existing acts and companies to get their name out to the public. It is a marketing exercise, and they're relying on people tuning in, being impressed with what their acts are. And the judges really don't even matter as far as that's concerned. And case in point, I'll get to one of the other acts that was on stage, who had already had hits and already had an album coming out. But the prize for this season is a Vegas act, like an engagement in Las Vegas. And the goal for Metaphysic was to win and get tourists to go see deep faked, entertainers in concert and, implying deep fake Elvis. And they did
a new step in that hologram thing that they've been doing.
Right. And I will say, to be fair to Metaphysic, they did get the rights from Authentic Brands. But the fact that they're working with corporations like Authentic Brands and they're already working, like, that just goes to show, like, this is not a real talent competition. They're showing off the potential uses for their technology and hopefully getting people to be interested in investing or hiring them to do stuff. And so using Elvis's likeness and the general public's affection for Elvis as a way of garnering votes, that feels skeevy to me.
Right.
It's one thing with the gimmick of, having the hosts, the judges, Simon Cowell and, whoever, like, that's just a funny gimmick. And like you said, like, there's an initial, like, moment of, like, oh, it's fun, it's lightweight and stuff like that. But, I mean, really, when you actually dig into what this show is, it's just a marketing thing for them to try to get hired on.
Sure.
By
they weren't
else.
even doing what they promised they were doing.
And they weren't even actually doing it live. And, Emilio Santoro, his vocal performance was just not good. No,
that was bad. Like, that was bad.
When we talk about ETAs on the show, like, people know, like, we're not opposed to Elvis tribute artists. We've had tribute artists on the show. We've featured the work of tribute artists on the show. We've done a whole episode on the history of tribute artists. We're not opposed to them in theory, but when you put Elvis's face on you, the expectation is different. The bar is so much higher when you are relying on the public's trust in what Elvis stands for, and the quality just was not there musically.
No. If it was just him by himself with his own voice, that'd be different.
Totally.
I mean, his own face. But if he's trying to project that voice over an Elvis image, and even that image, there was some kind of uncanny valley about that. It looked odd a bit.
I'm not someone who's opposed to the technology of deep fakes. I'm not even someone who's opposed. I mean, we talk all the time about remixes and reworkings and things like that.
It's actually remixed Elvis himself.
Kind of, but not really. This is basically just they put on a better quality Elvis mask onto an Elvis impersonator. That's all it was. And, the great thing about tribute and paying tribute to, artists through acts like this, because this is essentially how a show like this would go, is that you would hire on an Elvis tribute artist to go out and play the role of Elvis on stage, and then you just slap the deepfake Elvis face on the big screen, and eventually the technology will get there that you could do that real time.
Yeah. Give it 10 years.
Sure.
Or so, and I think we'll get there.
But I
My
don't.
God, I'm gonna be in my mid-50s then.
I just don't have the respect for that, because I think an actual Pepper's Ghost hologram that was fully CG would actually be a better tribute, because there's a lot of actual, like, talent and work that goes in by 3D artists, like, into that craft. Like, it is animation. Same with remixes and stuff like that. Whether you agree or disagree with how they go about it, like, as a composer, arranger, performer, producer, the people who contribute to those are putting a lot of themselves into it creatively. And what you have with something like this is that you don't really have that. You just have a pale imitation musically slapped on with, like, I mean, this is really no different than if I printed out Elvis's face and stuck it on a piece of cardboard and, strapped it to my face. It's just a much higher tech version of that.
Essentially, yeah.
And yeah, they're trading on Elvis's hard work and goodwill and reputation for votes. And I felt that was cheap. I don't have any problem with the novelty of it. A lot of people like the novelty. Luigi Leppo on YouTube has a ton of deep fakes of Elvis, tribute artists and stuff like that. Sometimes they'll even, like, sync up Elvis's master recordings, and there is, like, a nice novelty factor to that. Like, you suspend your disbelief a little bit, and it's like, oh, Elvis is singing a song he never sang, or something. We don't have video of him doing. That's fine, but this was bad. And I will say, like, even in terms of the performance, Emilio wasn't even the best Elvis tribute artist that performed on that stage that night.
I never had a reason, girl, to go around looking for a fire and walk through it. Ain't like me to want somebody rearranging all my want-tos. I ain't the kind of settle down and let my heart get wrapped around somebody's finger, but if I had you, baby, sounds like something, baby. Oh, sounds like something, baby.
Right. Who also performed?
Drake Milligan was out. I mean, he had been in the competition since early on. We had talked about how he had come on as his own act, and he had already put out his own extended play release, and he had been working on an album. In fact, the album is out now, and I'll talk about that in a second. But he ended up coming in third place on the competition. But his act was fantastic. The band was live. He was live. He's got vocal control. Like, he was 1,000 times better than Metaphysic and their act and Emilio. Like, just, it sounded better and it looked better. It was energetic. He's an entertainer. Like, he's got charisma. He's got all the things that you want out of an act, you know. And it was a genuine performance. And I got to give Drake credit. Like, he is the perfect example of what ETAs should strive to do. If you want to sing a little Elvis, do a little cosplay, like, that's fine, you know. And if you're getting paid for it, sure, people got to make a buck. But Beck and I just did a whole episode where the conclusion was, like, the best part of Elvis, like, his vocal evolution was when he stopped imitating others and blossomed into his self and his own art. And that's what's happened with Drake. Like, he found his own voice, and that voice is a wonderful country musician. Well, yeah, but, like, he understands where country music came from. You know, he has an appreciation for what country music stands for, and that's been reflected in the success of his material. Like, his album went #1 on iTunes. You know, people are dying for sincerity and authenticity in country music because it's been, you know, country radio is just not super friendly to traditional sounding country music. And I mean, you go buy Drake Milligan's album, there is a straight up Texas swing Bob Wills tribute song complete with accordion on it.
They think they can knock me out, boy, they better bring it. If I go down, I'm going down swinging.
Bring it on, Gordon, bring it on.
Who the fuck in 2022 puts accordion on a country music album? You know, but, like, Drake Milligan, because he understands the significance of, like, Pee Wee King and, like, you know, the traditions of Central European and Western European and African history on country music. And you don't get any of that out of Metaphysic. You just get Elvis's face slapped on an ETA. And that just, yeah, the contrast is just astronomical to me.
Well, tell us how you really feel.
I know. I did want to ask you, I sent you the other song from Drake's album, Long Haul. What did you think of this?
This is pretty good, even though it's country. I can swing with it. It sounds very Elvis Mystery Train Frankfurt Special mix thing going on.
I'd follow you to Tulsa, straight south to Abilene. Sing those Highway 40 blues to Memphis, Tennessee. I'd drive, fly, or I might even crawl. I'm in it for the long haul.
And there's a reason for that. James Burton is on it. And he has his, like, full-on 70s Mystery Train riff. And then Drake goes in, and around the 2-minute 50-second mark, he vocally references Baby Let's Play House by singing his new lyrics with that same sort of hiccupy vocal as Elvis did at the beginning of Baby Let's Play House. And I heard it, and I was just like, this is how you do a tribute.
Yeah.
You take the bits and pieces that you love, you put your own spin on them, and you make something new and beautiful.
Yeah, that long haul. Yeah, that long haul. Yeah, that long haul. long haul. Yeah, that long haul. Oh, play James.
Anyway,
So anyway, that
what
is,
did other people's opinion on this? They didn't like it.
I mean, they still came in like second place. So
Nice.
yeah, I don't know. But yeah, let us know
at
what you
least there
thought.
was something to talk about. Yeah, let us know what you thought about it. So what else is going on?
We do have a little bit of listener feedback. And this one comes from Brandon. Brandon says, "Hey, Justin. Hey, Gurdip. See, he remembered you. My question is based on the potluck episode where Gurdip went on a little mini rant about how he dislikes anything that's part of you, to which Justin pointed out that you had picked it as Song of the Week once, which surprised Gurdip, who came to the conclusion that it might have been a fan request, which was quite funny and got me searching for that episode. Not only was it not a request, but Gurdip was actually full of praises for the song and even called it underrated and one of Elvis's best ballads, whereas on the last episode he called it way too country and quite boring. And it got me to wondering about what could not only bring about such a change of heart, but also such a drastic one. Do you think that your musical mood of the moment can affect your opinion on a certain song, and is it possible for anyone to ever really analyze a song objectively? When you feel like listening to blues, for instance, and you have to go to a pop record, it might be a great one, but it's not what you want at the time, so you might be critical of it. And repetition can also be a factor. For example, I know Gurdip got tired of Don't Be Cruel, despite the fact he acknowledged how great of a pop song it was. But anything that's part of you isn't really the most played Elvis song. Of course, when your personal life relates to a song, it can also influence your take on it. I wonder if you often go back and listen to an opinion you had on a song a couple years ago and totally disagree with it now. I think we all do, but therefore, what value do opinions really have, as they never seem definitive? As far as my opinion on anything that's part of you, I love it. I agree with Justin that the writer is kind of a one-trick pony, and if you listen to his songs back-to-back, it might be overwhelming, but I think Elvis's vocal rendition on those songs, in particular in the early 60s, is a home run every time. Anyway, always a pleasure listening to you two and the overall gang. Your podcast brings me great pleasure and escapism in passion and comfort territory, so thank you for that, Brandon."
Yeah, I think he's right. Like for one thing, I think the mood does affect how you feel about a song.
Yeah.
And as he pointed out, Don't Be Cruel, it was totally played out for me, but now I'm kind of getting around to it. But I think the reason why I got tired of that song during that specific recording is because I heard so many of those outtakes.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I can't stand this. And not only that, but the other Don Robertson stuff that was in that album. So I think that had a lot to do with it. If I was to listen to it one-off, like say it just comes up just by itself on my playlist, I'm like, oh, this is a good song. I'm going to pick it for my Song of the Week.
Yeah.
But then if I'm constantly listening to take after take and more songs like it, I'm like, oh my God, I hate this song. So it is kind of right. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, our headspace and our the context in which we listen to things can give us new insight, and that's a good thing. I think that if we always had the same opinion all the time and never changed our minds about like being open to new ideas or new perspectives or ways of looking at songs, I think that would be really bad. I wouldn't want to listen to us talk and never learn anything or come to a new understanding about something. And maybe the lesson that we learned was listening to a whole bunch of outtakes of all sounding same songs is not the best way to find an appreciation for those songs, unless you get like a real Stockholm Syndrome type situation. But I'll say like the reverse can be true too. Like my opinion has turned the corner on a number of songs that I started out more apathetic towards, even at the beginning of our show, 4 years ago. And now that I've given them a little more attention, they stick out to me, and even on like the episodes that we've done about Elvis's, least, good songs or like our least favorite Elvis songs, like Golden Coins was one of my top ones. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, Golden Coins is all right. Like it's not great, but I wouldn't say that it's my least favorite. Right. So yeah, I mean, things change and context change. And I don't, I think you're right, Brandon. I don't think that there's a way that you can ever be truly objective because, how you listen to it is going to affect how you, and I've read that about media criticism all the time, and especially, you look at film critics or video game critics or things like that. Like if they're, watching 100 movies in a week, they're going to have a lot different opinion than the general public who might go see one movie in a month,
Yep. Yep.
So,
I mean, it happens to us. We watch a movie that night. We're like, oh my God, that was awesome. That was amazing. And then 2 months from now, when you watch it at home, we're like, what was I thinking? This is a piece of garbage. What the hell? But then there's some songs that I'm always going to like his latest Flame. I've listened to that song so many times. I've listened to all the outtakes, and I'm still not tired of it. So there's certain songs, there's probably a select few that no matter what, you're always going to be down to hear, and you're always going to praise it. It happens. What are you going to do?
So,
but thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you for researching and trying to trick me up and saying, look at this guy. What a hypocrite.
Call him out. All right. So, yeah, let's go ahead and dive into our main topic for the week. Now, this is a topic I've actually been planning to do this topic this week specifically for a year. It has been on my list since last year because I knew that this was coming up. It is the 20th anniversary of Elvis' 30 number one hits.
Do you know why TV has censors?
Love me tender.
Do you know why women throw their panties up on stage?
Never let me go.
Do you know why there's a magazine called Rolling Stone and a network called MTV? Do you know why everyone plays Las Vegas? Do you know why you know the word entourage? Do you know why? Elvis is why. For the first time ever, 30 of the King's number ones on one CD. Plus a special bonus number one, A Little Less Conversation remix. Before anyone did anything, Elvis did everything.
That's crazy. I remember when this thing was out. Strangely enough, I was in my down period of listening to Elvis when this came out. So when everyone was like talking about this album, or I saw a lot of promotion for it, I wasn't like big into Elvis. So it's kind of funny. But you were, I think.
Yeah, I had the Artist of the Century box set. I was starting to collect a little bit of vinyl. So this came right at the peak of my like initial interest in Elvis, of like I'm seriously becoming a fan, and this just solidified it.
Nice.
You know,
so what do we know about this album? Why did it come out?
This was a project that was developed by BMG, that owned Elvis's masters before they were acquired by Sony. After it was RCA, there was a middle era where it was BMG, which is why you'll sometimes hear us hosts who have been around that long refer to BMG. And they decided that in the wake of big-scale compilations like the Beatles one, they wanted to do a single-disc hits compilation of Elvis's biggest and most popular songs, but they did a weird thing where the tracklist selection, because Elvis only had 18 number one hits in the U.S., so the tracklist selection was done by a team of producers in the U.S. and the U.K., and they collectively sort of whittled it down between those two countries and tried to get most of the number one hits from those two countries onto a single disc, and then they came up with
Canada,
a nice...
and France.
Well, yes, and yeah, but not every single number one hit from all those countries. No. The basis was U.S. and U.K., and then if they were also number one on other countries, that will factor into how that weighs in. And to be fair, like they left off some pretty significant number ones, like Little Sister.
That was the whole thing about the double A side, right? Single.
Yes. Yep. And the nice round number they decided to come up with was 30, because when you added up all the songs that they ended up picking, it came pretty close to the length of a CD. They had a little extra room, which ended up working out for them as they included a bonus track that happened to come out around that time. But the project ended up in the hands of a producer by the name of David Bendeth. And he was a pop music producer who had been working since the very late 70s, and he'd been working with contemporary acts. And he had more of an ear, less for historical preservation and more towards just what music on contemporary radios sounded like. Right. And because of the trends of popular music, mastering and mixing had gone towards the way of sounding louder, and having more clarity in between the instruments, and just really, just a wall of sound across tracks. And so they wanted to try to get Elvis to sound that way, to sound like it could have come out, at that time in the early 2000s.
All right. I think people enjoyed it. I think you liked it, right?
I really enjoyed it, but there were Elvis fans that had quibbles with it, and yeah, we'll get into that.
They didn't like to bend it like Bendeth.
Yeah, that's a good one. Now the cool thing about this was that David Bendeth actually got to work from the elements of the original master tapes. And so he was sent up the tapes that had been stored basically in Iron Mountain in Pennsylvania. And this was one of the few times that they had actually been pulled out and allowed to be retransferred. And one of the challenges they had to overcome, among others, was that the tapes themselves were just sort of deteriorating. Like, they're physically, like, you have iron oxide flaking off the tape, and at one point apparently they had to put one in an oven and bake it just to make sure that it would, like, stay together, and so that it wasn't too crunchy.
Weren't Jorgensen and Seven like doing their restoration stuff with these originals yet?
I'm not sure exactly when they went through and had retransferred everything. I know that it had been an ongoing process, but it really was this specific one, because there's a promo video that got put out where you can actually see David Bendeth with the tapes and sort of handling them and showing, and some of the other challenges that they had was, like, for instance, on the 60s masters, they were 3-track, and there were, from David Bendeth's reports, there were apparently only 3-track tape machines left in the world in 2002 that could correctly play back the content on those tapes. So they had to capture the material on one they borrowed from a collector, just sort of an audiophile who had one that could play it back. And they also they also made next-gen copies of the tapes as a backup, like just straight-up exact copies, no alterations, just in case anything happened to the originals. And then they also made digital copies, which is what they actually worked with to mix and master the album.
I'm sure everything's been digitized now.
By this time, copies. With FTD and everything like that, everything's been digitized.
They should just preserve those, though, not even handle those.
I'm sure that they're under lock and key and just preserved. But one thing that I kind of wanted to talk about here is just to explain why this was a significant project in terms of, because we don't really talk about mixing and mastering other than shorthand, just kind of referencing it. But the difference between mixing and mastering, mixing is where within multi-track recordings, it's literally finding a balance of all the different elements that were recorded, and you treat each differently depending on what the needs are, and you alter each track with different effects of equalization of the frequencies, volume, sound compression, speed. All those things happen in the mixing phase, and then once that mix is finalized, then the person who is in charge of mixing, which in the case of the 60s and 70s tracks was David Bendeth, he would send those over to another company that they had hired that was Sterling Sound, which was run by two guys by the name of Ted Jensen and George Marino. And Ted was responsible for remastering the 50s tracks. And remastering or mastering is where the mix is done, but they just work out, okay, we're going to make sure that the quality and volume and everything and the levels are all consistent across all the things that it's going to be released with. And so that's where you get them all across from Heartbreak Hotel all the way to Way Down and the remix, basically just making sure that they all sound consistent. And in terms of Ted Jensen working on the 50s tracks, they're mono recordings, so he basically just got the masters of the mono recordings and just worked out, with equalization and things like that, what the levels needed to be, tried to clean up what was there.
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell. Well, it's down at the end of Lonely Street, that Heartbreak Hotel where I'll be just a lonely.
baby. Well, I'm so lonely. I'll be so lonely I could die.
Although it's always crowded, you still can find some room for broken-hearted lovers to cry there in the gloom.
There's a lot more. We can kind of go, not fully like track by track, but I'll kind of point out. But what was your thoughts upon listening to it as a consumer? You're like, just stepping back for a second from the weeds, and like, what was your thoughts upon getting the CD in 2002? What did you think of the new sound?
What made you think I bought the CD?
Well, or pirating it, what was your opinions?
What makes you think I pirated it? I mean, I had all these songs, right?
Did you never pick this up?
I never picked it up.
Oh my God, Gurdip!
What reason would I have to pick this up? Because if I had all the tracks, I did pick it up later. But when it came out, I didn't pick it up.
You didn't get to hear the new masters.
I didn't, but when I did hear it, I was like, "Oh wow, it sounds different. It sounds better, but it doesn't sound
louder."
I wasn't like blown away by how different it sounded, because is it very different though?
It is when you actually do A/B comparisons with.
Yeah, I guess comparisons.
The original masters versus.
I remember.
This. Yeah.
Return to sender. Return to sender. I gave a letter to the postman. He put it in his sack. Bright and early next morning, he brought my letter back.
She wrote upon it.
Return to sender. Address unknown.
I remember back in the 80s, and they had the #1 hits album and then the top 10 hits, which I think I picked for like my beginners, what did we call it? Beginners box for someone who's getting into Elvis. Those sounded really good to me back in the day. So I was, maybe I just wasn't listening to it, and maybe I was just listening to those crappy little headphones you used to have back in the day. But
again,
yeah.
Speaking about context of how you listen to something, like most people, a lot of consumers aren't listening on hi-fis.
No. So, but when I did get it, I was like, yeah, this is a good mix of songs, and they sound better than I normally would, but I wasn't like blown away. But yeah, I didn't pick this up when it first came out, but obviously you did. And what did you think?
I adored it. I loved how much more vibrant the mixes were, how much clearer they are.
What do you have to compare it to? Because did you have all these songs?
I had Artist of the Century, which pretty much had all these songs on it. Yeah. So I did have that to compare with. And then on top of that, I did not have Artist of the Century on CD. I had it on cassette. So obviously there's a loss of fidelity. Yeah. And
so let me ask you this. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
If you had these songs on CD from like the 90s or whenever, and then you put this on, would you have noticed a huge difference?
I don't think...
Like, say you had Artist of the Century on CD, and you put wherever device you used back in the day to play that on CD, and then you use the same device to play this, would you have noticed much of a difference?
As a about to turn 14-year-old at the time, I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But now I can, absolutely.
Right.
Now that my ear is trained to recognize those differences...
So what you're saying is, when I was in my 20s, I was no better than a 14-year-old Justin Gosman.
Yeah.
That's essentially when you break it down. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was different. It was better.
It was very, very different. And the crazy thing about this, let's just quickly run through the track list in case, for some weird reason, someone like you hasn't actually picked this CD up. But you have Heartbreak Hotel, Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog, Love Me Tender, Too Much, All Shook Up, Teddy Bear, Jailhouse Rock, Don't, Hard-Headed Woman, One Night, A Fool Such as I, Big Hunk of Love, that's the 50s. 60s are Stuck on You, It's Now or Never, Are You Lonesome Tonight, Wooden Heart, Surrender, His Latest Flame, Can't Help Falling in Love, Good Luck Charm, She's Not You, Return to Sender, Devil in Disguise, Crying in the Chapel, In the Ghetto, Suspicious Minds, and then for the 70s, we only have 3 tracks. The Wonder of You, Burning Love, and Way Down. And then there is a bonus track that we'll get to in a minute.
This track listing is almost identical to that top 10 hits one I was telling you from the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why I was like, well, why do I need this? Besides getting that remix.
Totally. But just to talk about the quibbles that some audio some audiophile Elvis fans, like real purists, had, some of the issues they took with what was done, I have to kind of explain what happened with David Bendeth and how he actually got the tapes. When he got the tapes, they weren't complete in some cases. There were just, we've talked before, RCA didn't know what they were doing back in the day. Right. And so certain things just weren't together. They weren't included. So, for instance, the master of A Fool Such As I, they went with an alternate take 8. And right. David Bendeth claimed that the master take was damaged and that the right channel was ruined, so they ended up going with an alternate take.
I'm a fool, but I love you, dear, until the day I die. Now and then I'm a fool, but I love you, dear, until the day I die. Now and then, as a fool such as I. But I love you, dear, until the day I die. Now and then, as a fool such as I.
Big Hunk of Love, the original version that was on the single, was a splice of takes 3 and 4, and instead they just used take 3 rather than a splice. So they just rolled with that. And more significantly in the 60s and 70s, they, for The Wonder of You, if you want to talk about how incompetent RCA was at the time, the tapes that he got were of the February 1970 engagements where Elvis was performing different versions of The Wonder of You. Yep. And the tapes were actually not marked with which version was the master. Mm-hmm. And he did not have or did not think to consult Ernst or Roger on which was the master. So he just rolled with whatever one he thought was best. And so the version that was actually the single was the dinner show performance from February 18th, 1970. And this is the famous one where at the very beginning, Elvis sings along with the intro.
When no one else can understand me, when everything I do is wrong.
The one that everybody's familiar with.
Everyone's familiar with.
Listen to Elvis, yeah.
The version that was included on the original release is the midnight show version from that same night, where Elvis does not sing along with the opening. No.
When no one else can understand me, when everything I do is wrong.
I remember that. I was like, wait a second. This is not the one I'm used to.
Yep. That's why it was different. It was a completely different performance altogether.
That put me off, I gotta say. That put me off. I was like, he's not saying the stuff that he did in the one I'm used to, the Masters. And yeah. I mean, did you have that?
I did notice that there was a difference, but I didn't think about it until later on after it was pointed out.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't have as strong of an opinion about it, but it does raise an ethical question of, this is Elvis's 30 number one hits. Is this the song that went number one? Because it's not the performance that went number one.
It's that specific.
This would be like we just did this Buddy Holly episode on Patreon. If you said that the number one hit was the album version of That'll Be the Day, is that the number one hit? Well, it's the same song, but it's not the right performance. The one that actually went number one was the original version.
Right.
So is the one that everyone, that people are putting out there as like, this is the number one hit. I mean, you might as well, so just as an example of how bad this could have gone, because let's just say you take in and throw, just for a comical effect, let's say you throw in a live version from the 70s of Hound Dog and just say, well, that's the number one hit. Like, he's doing the number one hit performance. Yes, it was performed on the same night. Musically, it's mostly the same. but it isn't the one that it isn't the recording that went number one.
It's not the one that people heard and made into number one.
Exactly. It's not the one that sold the records. Yeah. And so I can see why people were upset about some of these variant takes that were included on the original release in 2002. But another cool thing that did happen was that they did have some extended fade-outs, like Jailhouse Rock. The version that is presented on the CD is longer on the fade than the single version of Jailhouse Rock that was released in the 50s. And that was because they had the master tape. They could just let it play a little bit longer. And same with Return to Sender. The fade out is just ever so slightly longer, just to allow in the fade you can hear Boots Randolph kind of playing a sax solo, and it gets cut off, or playing a sax part. It gets cut off on the single, so they actually were able to fix that. And same with In the Ghetto. The fade was extended by almost 10 seconds compared to the original single. I just really quickly also want to talk about Suspicious Minds, because this is the one that also had a lot of controversy around it. Are you familiar about what happened with Suspicious Minds?
No, tell me.
So,
what would life be?
I know. Back in 1969, this is a Felton Jarvis fuck-up. When Felton Jarvis went back in and overdubbed the horn section, as Beck and Olivia and I talked about, when we did the episode about Elvis's 1969 engagements and that live album that came out, the From Vegas to Memphis or whatever it was called, Live at the International, Felton had been seeing Elvis performing live and knew that the single was going to be coming out, but the mix was not finalized. Now, back in Memphis, Chips Moman and the arranger down in Memphis, which I think was Mike Leach, they had overdubbed strings onto Suspicious Minds, but had not intended to overdub horns, because they had also recorded horns for other songs at that same session when they had done the overdubs for Suspicious Minds with the strings. And they had clearly intended there not to be horns. And Felton, when in Vegas, saw that, there's horn players on the live version, and I'm just going to make this sound more like the live version. I'm going to bring in the same players from the Vegas orchestra, have them play the horn part from the live version, and on top of that, I'm going to splice and loop back the ending of the song so I can do this fade out and fade in to sort of give you a feel of Elvis's live version, where he would change the delivery and, get really slow and get really quiet and then all of a sudden get louder. Instead, it's just this weird fade where you think the song is completely fading out and then it comes back. Yeah. What ended up happening was that at that session where Felton did the overdub, he just decided, well, I've got all the elements here. I'm just going to finalize the mixes and master these out. And so he threw away, disposed, the tapes were left, whatever the situation was. The horn part never actually made it out of that Vegas studio, the actual original tapes of those horns. The only way that you can hear the original horn performances are on the Stereo Master and on the Mono Master. They came out in the 60s. You cannot get a properly true isolated track of the horns because the tape doesn't exist anymore for whatever, Felton just fucked that up. And so when David Bendeth got the tapes for Suspicious Minds, the horn part wasn't on there. And so what he had to do was that he basically had to take the master version of Suspicious Minds that had already existed and digitally extract the horns in Pro Tools. And because the technology was not as sophisticated back in 2002 as it is today, it's imperfectly done. It has a more digitized sound, and it's also improperly synchronized up because of leakage from the elements of the original single. And so when he was mixing it and added the horns back in, you actually have this weird phasing effect on the instruments in Elvis's voice where it almost sounds like Elvis is slightly doubled. And it really irritated a lot of purist Elvis fans. They're like, why does Elvis sound like he's had like some electronic effect added onto his vocal?
We can't go on together with suspicious minds. And we can build our dreams on suspicious minds. Won't let our love survive.
They're like, we're just going with the Sam Phillips method. We're giving him an echo.
A really bad
That's
echo.
all it is.
Yeah. But that was a big thing for a lot of Elvis fans at the time that were real purists, to the extent that David Bendeth later on went on to the For Elvis CD Collectors forum, and this would not happen today. Like people from the record company going into a fan forum and just like getting into a conversation with everyone. And
It was a Wild West back then.
I know, it was total Wild West, and you can actually find this out there. But basically, he basically said that the reactions from a few hardcore fans and some critics have turned me off from the idea of working on Elvis ever again. He was like, I really enjoyed working on Elvis's stuff because I hadn't really been much of an Elvis fan before. And this reignited an interest in Elvis for me. And then after the backlash, he was just like, I don't want to work on Elvis again if fans are going to be like this.
He's like 2 middle fingers up.
Yeah. It was pretty funny. And and of course in the remastering phase, obviously with the EQ and stuff, they bumped the bass where it had not been as prominent on the original 45s and on the original singles. Just by, because when you put a single out on a record, you have to make sure that the frequencies don't cause the actual needle to skip. That's why you can't have really heavy. Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you couldn't have really heavy bass, and you would rely on consumers to turn up the bass level on their actual system if they really wanted that bass sound. But now that it's digital, they could just go in and just do it, and provide that extra kick that they didn't have. One other little Easter egg that happened was that on the single version of Way Down, there's a little bit of an Easter egg that got left in when they transferred the tapes, because when Felton had done the master for the single, there's a moment where Elvis is about to sing the line, "Hold me again as tight as you can," but he comes in just a hair too early, and in the original single, Felton edited out that coming in early, but David Bendeth left that in there.
Hold me again as tight as you can. I need you so, baby, let's go. Way down where it feels so good. Way down where I hope it will.
And so you get to hear that little kind of Easter egg on that. And yeah, so I mean, overall, it was this collection of tracks that had been remastered from the original source tapes for the most part, with some changes and tweaks. where necessary for whatever reason. Another one that sort of had a similar thing, It's Now or Never, the piano part similarly was overdubbed and had to be digitally extracted from an earlier version of the single. But that one didn't cause quite the same effect, so it wasn't really as drawn attention to.
I mean, essentially, it sounds like all it did was just point out, put a light on, shine a light on. Like when you go underneath like rocks and you shine a light on, you see all these 1,000 leggers and all these silverfish and all that, to RCA and essentially their production, and as well as Felton. Like, how horribly they treated Elvis's work. And not only, like, look at the album covers. Like, it just sounds like a series of unfortunate events when it came to his music.
Yeah, and so I definitely, like, when you actually go through and read some of the interviews that David Bendeth gave in the aftermath of the CD coming out, or even in promotion for the album coming out, it just sounds like he was given an impossible task of, here's a bunch of tapes that you have no idea what is the master take on certain songs, and some of the songs don't even have all the elements that you're going to need, and all the fans are going to come down on you hard for whatever reason, for whatever the criticism is, whether that's it sounds too contemporary or it's not historically accurate or whatever, you're going to be under fire for that. And then on top of that, the mastering job that Ted Jensen and George Marino did obviously ended up being also more contemporary with very loud compression, on the whole recording. And so across the board, the whole thing ends up sounding very loud. And if you throw them in like a waveform thing like Audacity, you can see the difference between the original and this in terms of just how the differences between the quiet parts and the high parts are not as wide as they were on the originals.
A very old friend came by today, 'cause he was telling everyone in town of the love that he just found, and Marie's the name of his latest flame. He talked and talked, and I heard him say that she had the longest, blackest hair, the prettiest green eyes anywhere.
But what do you think of it overall, though? Do you like it?
Overall, I always really liked it. And that's the thing that stuck out, is that, like, you go back and you dig through all this research and you find out what fans were talking about at the time 20 years ago, and you just go, yeah, but it was still a success. Like,
yeah, it did well, didn't it? It hit number one?
Extremely well. It hit number one. It sold a cajillion records, which I'll talk about sales in a second. But it blows me away that, like, this was the first time that Elvis really got to have, a positive light shown on the artistry of his work in such a way that, like, yeah, when you had the 50s master set come out, there was a bit of a marketing push behind it. But this, like, BMG really leaned into this and really marketed this album very heavily. Do you remember the advertising campaign around this?
Not really, no.
Basically, they ran this campaign that was all about, before anyone did anything, Elvis did everything.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. The art design was this very stark gold, black, and white art design.
That's good.
What do you think of this as, someone who is interested in art design yourself?
Oh, I thought this is the way they should have went with Elvis stuff. 'Cause look at it. It projects regal, like something beyond like a typical star. It's like it harkens back to those letters in the '68 special, the big Elvis letters with the little dots forming Elvis, and then obviously the eyes number one. It's graphically, I have no complaints about this.
No notes.
This is great.
Yeah, and in the booklet itself, when you actually flip through the liner notes, they use a lot of. There's hardly any full pictures of Elvis. There's a lot of ones that are like partial, like they cut off, the top of his head, or it's in profile and it cuts off kind of the back of his head. And they're going for a more contemporary to 2002 aesthetic,
modern,
with all the art design. And, in terms of that cover with the sort of the Vegas Lights type look, of the dots spelling out Elvis's name. That was so influential in the fact that even a contemporary rock band at the time took influence and created their logo to look like that. The Killers, actually, Brandon Flowers was inspired by the 30 number one hits art design to when he had the Killer's logo commissioned. He basically had it done in that style, and that's the style that that's the same logo the Killers still use today. It was influenced by 30 number one hits.
I'm just a glorified Elvis impersonator. That's all I am, really. That's what all of us are.
You don't mean that.
And that's all
I've
we
seen
are.
you on stage. You don't look like Elvis.
I'm trying. I'm doing my best.
You didn't need his image on the front.
No,
his
you
name
didn't.
sells it. You know who Elvis is.
It's the word Elvis with the number 1 replacing the letter I, and then the subtitle 30 number one hits. Very clean, simple, evocative, and I remember how much that gold packaging stood out in stores. Still does. You can still find copies of 30 number one hits out there today.
Sure.
And in terms of sales, within 1 year, at the time of the follow-ups pressing, it was reported to have sold in 9 million copies worldwide, or at least that's what BMG says in the liner notes of that second album. So take BMG with as much salt as you need. Reached number 1 on the album charts of over 24 countries, including both of the countries whose charts were reflected in the track selection, so US and UK. By the end of October 2002, barely a month from when it was released, because it was released September 24th, 2002, in 1 month it was already certified gold and 2 times platinum by the RIAA. The most recent certification that I could find on the RIAA website has it pegged at over 6 million copies in the US. Just astronomical numbers of sales. Like, this is by far probably the best-selling Elvis release of the 21st century.
Sure.
And you didn't buy it. I
didn't. I told you, this is my down period. What am I supposed to do? I missed this and the Prince from Another Planet. I missed a bunch of stuff. My thoughts were elsewhere.
Totally.
What am I supposed to do?
Right.
But looking back, I wish I was, big time into Elvis at this point. I told you before, way back, I've told you throughout our whole podcast series that it ebbs and flows, my Elvis fandom. Later on, like from the 80s and 90s, maybe late 90s, it was pretty much on, but then it kind of went down and it would go up. I'd watch something and it'd go up and then down. And then since we've done the podcast, it's pretty much been up. So, but yours wasn't like that, your fandom. You said you were pretty always, like, you were much...
I mean, later on, it kind of, wavered in and out, but right at the start, it was full force. And so I just wanted to mention, because when you picked that up, might have affected the versions of the songs that you recorded, because there were different reissues of this over the years, and they actually swapped out some of the tracks due to fan criticism. Obviously, you have the original CD and cassette release back in 2002, which was the big success. Much later on, it would get reissued on vinyl. In 2003, it was issued on DVD audio, and the track list was reversed to take advantage and show off the multi-track recordings in a new 5.1 mix. And then that's why they start with, the A Little Less Conversation remix, and then work their way back through from the 70s back through the 3-track and then to the mono stuff.
How would you get 5.1 on mono?
So what they did with those is that they actually created ambience tracks by playing the master like in one room and then recording like the bounce off the walls and the vibes from like the other room and things like that, just to give it more space, And the 50s ones, they're a little closer to, they're not as bad as, but they're close technologically to those like fake reprocessed stereo stuff of the 60s, where like it's just the mono track like multiple times. But the multi-tracks really pop, and if you have a system where you can isolate the channels for yourself, that can be a revelation, especially on the 70s stuff and the American Sound stuff. Like, you can get almost to an instrument by instrument level of separating out the tracks.
On a cold and gray Chicago morning, a poor little baby child is born in the ghetto. And his mom Well, don't you understand?
And it's really, really cool. And then the neat thing is that for the A Little Less Conversation remix, they actually received JXL's original Pro Tools project files for the remix. And they did a new 5.1 mix from that. But it turns out, apparently, that JXL, to do the remix, literally just ripped a file from the Memories 68 Comeback Special CD. Yeah, and that was what the famous remix was built upon. And what's cool about listening to that in the DVD audio version is that you can find out, like, there's an entire track that's dedicated almost entirely to cowbell.
Right.
It's amazing. But you can also hear the other elements of the new guitar parts that have been added, the new organ, the new backing vocalists, to give it a little bit more of a gospel feel. And yeah, just a fantastic experience. And I actually picked that up back in, I think 2005 or 2006. I ordered it offline, so I actually have that. It's pretty hard to come by nowadays.
Nice. Awesome.
There were a few other versions that came out. There were some bonus discs that came out. There was one that had that post-Army Elvis interview from August 1960. There was another one that had a separate disc from 2003 that had sort of alternate versions, like alternate takes or live versions or rehearsals or things like that. And then in 2007, on the anniversary of Elvis's passing, they actually started reissuing. So they added back in the correct versions of A Fool Such as I, The Wonder of You, and they updated the masters of Suspicious Minds, Hound Dog, which had a little bit of it just needed a little extra cleanup more than what it already had. And however, they did leave Big Hunk of Love as just the unspliced take 3. But yeah, so that was the reissue, and then over the years it's been repackaged and packaged again. Most prominently, there was a 3-disc set with 30 number one hits, the follow-up CD Second to None, and also the third volume, which did not get a single disc release. It was called Hitstory, and was sort of along the same lines of just fleshing out the last bits of the most prominently well-known Elvis recordings. But I did want to ask you before we close up on the main topic, what were your thoughts on the A Little Less Conversation remix? Because that was the bonus track.
When I first came out, I was like, oh yeah, this is great, because I'm not opposed to remixes. So I really enjoyed it, and I remember it was on everywhere. Like, didn't FIFA use it for a while too?
Nike used it.
Nike did? Yeah, Nike. So it was everywhere, and I was like, this is great. The video, I was like, yeah, it's kind of doing a takeoff of 68, but it was fine. But I liked the fact that a lot of people were listening. And then on top of that, it started appearing in films and TV shows.
Very prominently, yep. And between the Nike campaign, because you could get the CD single, but those were hard to come by. I actually lucked out and found a CD single at the time ahead of the 30 number one hits coming out, and so I was able to pick it up. But this was the place that you could get that remix. Like, if you want to hear A Little Less Conversation, buy 30 number one hits. And I remember there being a lot of marketing around. It's got this new remix. This is the first time that Elvis has ever been done a dance remix.
You were like, not me. I got the single.
Exactly.
I don't need it.
I had the extended version, because that single had 3 versions. It had the radio edit, it had an extended edit, and then it had the original, the acetate version.
Come on, come on. Come on, come on. Come on, come on. Don't procrastinate, don't articulate. Girl, it's getting late. You just sit and wait around.
The R-rated version where there's a lot of F-bombs. No, it's great. I mean, it was prominent, and a lot of people who never listened to Elvis music did check this out, or at least have it in their iTunes collection, because a lot of people who didn't care to listen to Elvis still would have this, because they figure they got a good chunk of his material. So that I do know, it opened Elvis up to a lot of ears that normally wouldn't listen to him.
Yeah.
The fans were already going to buy anyway. I mean, fans that were better than me, but I did like the fact that a lot of people were picking it up. Because I remember seeing people who in stores and stuff who I would never see people buy Elvis albums, but they actually had this. So that part, I think, it was great.
I, looking back at it, still have a great fondness for it. It was kind of nice to go back and re-listen to it. I actually went into my storage and pulled out the original CD and re-listened to not my original copy, because I have the weirdest story. I bought it, and the first copy I bought was defective, and it went all the way through, and then on Burning Love, like for some reason the disc was like, you know, something went wrong with it, so it just wasn't playing right. So I ended up having to go back and get a second copy. But the second copy I have is so worn out, and like the edges of the booklet are frayed, and I looked through it so many times reading, because Peter Guralnick did the liner notes, and I pulled a quote from that last week talking about, you know, because basically on every song he gave like a, you know, few sentence long blurb. It wasn't even as in depth as the liner notes that were done for Artists of the Century, but it's just this quick little blurb. And one quote that I wanted to pull from Peter Guralnick here says, "Some of the songs on this album are so familiar that it can be difficult at times to recall the immediacy of their initial impact. Some of the pleasure we take in them derives from memory, of course, but I think if we can set aside for a moment the context in which they were first heard, the freshness, the originality, the emotional truth, and the sheer fun of them will surely come through," is what Guralnick had to say. And yeah, it was a really fun release. It was a time that reminded people why Elvis was great. And along those lines, David Bendeth, in sort of a post-mortem thread on the Elvis CD Collectors Forum, said one of the things he learned as a result from the project is that his quote is, "No one really likes to share their favorite artist. It's kind of personal. When smaller bands today start to sell tons of records, their hardcore fans usually abandon them because they are no longer that private band. Elvis 30 #1 hits brought Elvis back into the spotlight. I believe the hardcore fans had to disapprove. I mean, why would they like a CD that everyone else liked? How blasphemous. Real Elvis fans, I mean the diehards, like live recordings and bootlegs, rare things like that. And Elvis 30 #1 hits was not that." End quote. And I just thought, stumbling onto that quote, I was just like, oh my God. Like, fast forward 20 years, and we look at Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, and there's so many Elvis fans that I have seen who have decided that they don't like the movie because it's popular, you know, and because it has brought in new fans, you know. And, you know, similarly, Baz Luhrmann's Elvis has better expressed the excitement of what Elvis was to a new generation than pretty much any project since 30 #1 hits. And yet there are tons of fans who were quick to say, you know, this was bad about it, or that was bad. You know, Austin was bad. The movie was too flashy. Didn't have my favorite scene or my favorite song. Finding their own little nitpicks about it. Well, potential new fans are just discovering Elvis for the first time and just excited to learn about him. And the reality is that now 20 years on, even from 30 #1 hits, like Elvis's fandom, while vibrant again, is a lot smaller than it was even in 2002. And I will say that Baz Luhrmann's Elvis was the most positive, like, large-scale discourse I've seen around Elvis in 20 years. And I can't imagine being upset about that or not welcoming new fans into the fold. Like, yeah, like, I love Elvis, and I love digging into all this, like, old stuff and all the live recordings and bootlegs. Like, I want to share that with people, and that's why I'm glad to be doing the show with you. And I will say, like, Artists of the Century is maybe the box set that made me an Elvis fan. But 30 #1 hits was the one that confirmed to me that I was not alone.
There you go.
Don't be cruel to a heart that's true. Don't be cruel to a heart that's true. I don't want no other love, oh, baby, it's just you I'm thinking of.
Let's head over to Song of the Week for more Elvis classics.
Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Elvis Presley. Well, get out of that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans.
What a night. Ooh, what a night it was. It really was such a night.
Well, when Monday comes, she's Tuesday. When Tuesday comes, she's Wednesday. Somewhere in the heart of Rome.
He talked and talked,
and I heard him say, I know that you've been told it's not fair to tease. It's the edge of reality.
So speaking of classic Elvis songs,
I don't know. That giggle is making me nervous.
well, as you know, it is Justin Attempts to Explain Bad Movie Songs month. And so the song that I went for this week is Old MacDonald.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on that farm he had some chicks, E-I-E-I-O. With a cluck cluck here, a cluck cluck there, loud as they could be. And when those chicks got out of line, chicken fricassee. With a cluck cluck here and a cluck cluck there, loud as they could be. And when those chicks got out of line, chicken fricassee.
Wow, you went there.
I went there. I went for the one that is most commonly referred to as the worst song Elvis ever recorded.
Yeah, one of the most reviled.
One of the most reviled, even by the artist himself. I'll get to a story about that in a second.
Dominic's up there, but
before
yeah,
we do anything else, I want to ask you two questions kind of within the same thing. Where did you first hear Old MacDonald? And where did you first hear Elvis's version of Old MacDonald?
Well, the first question's kind of tough. I'm sure it was even before school, probably like Sesame Street. One of those, children's educational things. That Electric Company used to be a bunch of the Canadian ones that we could get here. I'm sure I must have heard it there before school. And then obviously, as you go through school, you hear your kindergarten teacher sing it, what have you. So you're very familiar with the song. And not only that, but cartoons like Looney Tunes, they would sing it. So I was well versed with that song, very familiar. Elvis's, I'm thinking that Elvis sings for children and adults too. That was probably where I first heard it because I was in the 80s and that's when I got that. And I believe it's on there, correct?
Yeah, that was where I first heard it. Was Elvis Sings for Children and Kids? Yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously I watched it in the film and I was like, wow, this is really bad. And when I listened to it in the album, I was like, why is he singing this? Like, what? So I was just curious. I was like, why would he be singing this song? Like, what possible reason? This is the dude who sang One Night. What's going on here?
Yeah.
So what did you think?
So yeah, as mentioned, I first heard Elvis's version on Elvis Sings for Children and Adults too. I just picked it up as budget compilation. I think it was probably $5. Relatively early. I think probably 2004. 5 somewhere in there.
Early. More like I heard it in 86,
yeah.
87.
Yeah. Early for me. That's what I mean. Early in my fandom. That's where I first heard Elvis's version. It's the first time I heard Old MacDonald. Probably heard it before school. But I do very vividly remember watching, and I dug up the audio from this, a Sesame Street sing-along tape that I had as a kid, and I watched it all the time from the 80s. And it's just a really cute performance. Everyone's gathered around together on the roof of a building, and the Muppets and the humans are all singing together. There's a bunch of kids, and I always loved watching this tape. There were so many great classic Sesame Street kids performances, not only classic children's songs like this, but also songs that were originals like Do the Pigeon or Rubber Ducky or things like that, original Sesame Street songs.
Hey, how about a saxophone? Saxophone? Yeah, saxophone.
All right, why not?
Okay,
Let's try it. Here we go.
Okay, saxophone.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on his farm he had a saxophone, E-I-E-I-O. With a here and a there, here and there, everywhere. Oink, oink here, oink, oink there, here, oink there, oink everywhere, oink, oink, woof, woof here, woof, woof there, here, woof there, woof everywhere, woof, woof.
It's not questionable why kids would like it. You get to imitate songs of animals. You're gonna like this song if you're a kid.
Yeah, and it's instructive. It's a way of teaching kids what sounds animals make. And just diving back to a few versions before Elvis's, the earliest known recording of Old MacDonald was from 1926. The Sam Patterson Trio had a version. Their harmonies are actually pretty good. I mean, obviously, audio quality is pretty rough, but it's kind of a neat little version of it to go back to and listen for the first known recording of the song.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on this farm he had some chicks, E-I-E-I-O, with a tick tick here and a tick tick there, here a tick, there a tick, everywhere a tick tick. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on this farm he had some ducks, E-I-E-I-O.
1946, Spike Jones did a version, and it has a mix of human-made and artificial sound effects, and it, you know, being a Spike Jones song, kind of gets comedic by the end. Like, it starts off with things like cowbells and fake hooves, but then by the end of the song, Old MacDonald has more exotic things, like a parrot and a car.
Now, Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on his farm he had a car, E-I-E-I-O, with a here, there, everywhere. Here, there, everywhere. Here, there, everywhere. Here, there, everywhere. Here, there, everywhere.
And,
women.
well, that would be the Frank Sinatra version from 1960.
And the Bo Diddley version. Hey, Bo Diddley.
Yeah.
Bo Diddley had a farm. Well, that farm he had some women. Women here and women there. Women everywhere. But one little girl lived on the hill.
But yeah, Frank Sinatra did it in 1960 as a single, which peaked at number 25 in the U.S. and number 11 in the U.K. And the lyrics were essentially rewritten to be about a beautiful woman, spinning off of the wordplay of the word chick to the 60s equivalent of that.
I used to be a traveling man, E-I-O, until I hit MacDonald's place. Things were mighty slow, with a little chick here and a little chick there. I didn't have a real chick anywhere. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. This farm...
But the arrangement on the Nelson Riddle version, I mean, granted, like, it's just spectacular. And Frank is, you know, he sounds great, and he's having fun with it. And I just got a shout-out as well, the Frank Sinatra version. Grandpa Simpson did a version of the Frank Sinatra lyrics on the episode Homer's Barbershop, the first episode of Season 5 of The Simpsons, where he is auditioning for a show. And, Grandpa Simpson gets to do the Frank Sinatra version.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on this farm he had a chick, the swingin'est chick I know, with a wiggle wiggle here and a wiggle wiggle there.
Get off the stage. I want to, but I can't.
My hero, Grandpa Simpson.
Absolutely.
Now, let me ask you a question before you continue. Was this song initially conceived to be a kid's song, or did it kind of transition into that?
I'm going to get to there.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
1948, I know I'm jumping back a bit, but I really wanted to jump on Sinatra. Nat King Cole did a version on King Cole for Kids. This is complete with, again, human-made animal sound effects like quacking and oinking and clucking, but Nat King Cole sounds as smooth as ever. Just a fantastic vocal performance, despite being on an album ostensibly for children.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on his farm he had some ducks, E-I-E-I-O, with a here, there, everywhere, with a here, there, everywhere. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O.
Ella Fitzgerald in 1966 does a blisteringly fast jazz version. You almost wonder if she's going to be able to keep up with it, but she does. It is a hell of a performance, and then it goes for this amazing kind of big bluesy ending.
Oh, MacDonald had a farm, what a swinging farm, and it. How you gonna keep him down on this farm like
There's actually video of her doing it live on television, which is kind of neat to hear.
Nice.
So you've got like these very dignified artists. I mean, nobody would say that, you know, Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and Nat King Cole weren't great performers and entertainers in their own right. They did versions of Old MacDonald Had a Farm.
Sure.
What's the problem with Elvis doing Old MacDonald Had a Farm? Elvis's version, the instrumental track, was recorded June 29th, 1966 on the MGM soundstage. Now, this was recorded at the sessions for the film Double Trouble. There are a number of stories, most prominently the one told by Priscilla in the book Elvis by the Presleys. She says, I remember when Elvis had to sing Old MacDonald in the film Double Trouble, he stormed out of the session. He was incensed for days. You mean it's come to this, he bitterly complained. Those damn fools got me singing Old MacDonald on the back of a truck with a bunch of animals. Man, it's a joke. And the joke's on me.
Well, old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on that farm he had some pigs, E-I-E-I-O. With an oink-knock here and a oink-knock there, pigs everywhere in sight. And when those pigs got out of line, porking beans at night. With an oink-knock here and a oink-knock there, pigs everywhere in sight. And when those pigs got out of line, porking beans at night.
I don't doubt that Priscilla and Elvis had that conversation. She overheard him say that because, you know, Old MacDonald had become a song that was associated with children or for children. And I'm sure that he felt it was ridiculous. So I don't doubt that story. However, I do have to point out that at the recording session, the way that the takes are numbered out, you know how they always call out what the production number is, you know, 2008 take 1, you know, or things like that. At that session where he was recording the Double Trouble soundtrack, he was there with the band for a lot of stuff, like Baby If You Give Me All Your Love, I Love Only One Girl, It Won't Be Long, and those were the songs in the direct lead up to Old MacDonald, and he was there for I Won't Be Long, 2009, and then 2010 was Old MacDonald. But Elvis is not noted to have been present to record a vocal track on that song. However, he is noted to be on 2011, the very next song, Long-Legged Girl with the Short Dress On. So if he stormed out of the session, he apparently came right back to do Long-Legged Girl with the Short Dress On. There is a good theory to be made that the instrumental was recorded for a different song. It is known from early versions of the script that the song that was supposed to be done was a song called Antwerp, Here We Come, that was going to be written by the same songwriter, Randy Starr. And the working theory that has been discussed by some Elvis fans is that it's possible that Elvis realized that the song was Old MacDonald and just asked for rewritten lyrics to Old MacDonald. Like this Antwerp Here We Come is stupid. Let's just do Old MacDonald if we're going to do Old MacDonald. We don't have any proof of that. Randy Starr in the book Writing with the King talks about how he added the new lyrics to Old MacDonald. It was a public domain song, and he says, each of my verses features a different farm animal and tells what the farmer did if they misbehaved. Naturally, the lyric was meant to be humorous because that's what the scene called for and what the producers specifically requested in the script they sent to the writers. And as you mentioned, you watch it in the film, and Elvis is on the back of a truck with, is that Annette Day playing the co-star in that film? And it's loaded down with chickens, and that inspires his character to start singing Old MacDonald Had a Farm while they're riding down the road towards Antwerp. And that's where it shows up. And then, of course, naturally, it showed up on the soundtrack album for Double Trouble and quickly gained infamy amongst many Elvis fans. But performance-wise, he doesn't sound like he's bored by it. He certainly doesn't sound like he's, like, maybe... I'm trying to think, like, compare with, like, Hound Dog, you know, when he recorded Hound Dog, and we know that Elvis was, you know, apparently frustrated with how he had performed, you know, how he had been made fun of on the Steve Allen show, and some people have attributed the intensity of that recording, and I don't even hear that in this, you know, but it's not like it's a disengaged vocal performance either.
No, I think it's just the fact that it's Old MacDonald and Elvis singing it.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of Elvis fans had a problem with.
Yeah.
Me included. I was like, back then, I was like, why is he recording this?
Exactly. And of course it does, as mentioned with Randy Starr, have these dark tweaks to the lyrics where it adds consequences to the animals being getting out of line. And it ends up putting this, you know, darker spin on the song where all the farm animals get used for their intended purpose as food. And I do want to talk a little bit now about the history of Old MacDonald, because it has become this infamous Elvis Presley song. But the history of Old MacDonald is actually really interesting and dates all the way back to an 18th century writer by the name of Thomas Durfee, who was an English writer of songs, and he was apparently a prominent comedic writer of his era, and apparently was so successful that at times he earned the favor of King Charles II, King William III, Queen Anne, and just sort of ran in royal circles, and he was known for writing a lot of satirical comedic songs and poems. And I found a book that was a collection of over 1,000 songs written by Thomas Durfee. In 1719, there was this music publisher who put together this big book, actually multi-volume book, 6 tomes of material of various songs that he wrote. And you get, you know, a little bit of sheet music, and then you get the words to go along with that music. And the volume is called Wit and Mirth, or Pills to Purge Melancholy. Pills to Purge Melancholy, obviously meaning like these are your dose of laughter. You know, this is going to be something to make you happy. And almost all of the songs in these this compilation of you know, basically Thomas Durfee hits are comedic and joyful and funny. And there's a couple that I wanted to draw attention to just to give you the caliber of the type of song that this guy wrote. There's a song called Fart.
There you go.
It's basically about a fart that gets ripped in the court of Queen Anne, and everyone is going, who farted? There's also another one that is called Oh Mother, Roger with His Kisses, and it's about a woman sitting on her love's lap and realizing that there's something in his lap that's not in her mother's.
Okay.
He sets me
In her
his
mother's lap.
cool hours where I feel I know not what. Something I never felt in yours. Pray tell me, mother, what is that?
And so basically that's like all of these songs from this Thomas Durfee guy have a comedic bent where oftentimes they're quite lewd, quite full of innuendo, very humorous, just absolutely hilarious stuff. And Old MacDonald actually dates from a song that he wrote for an opera that he had worked on in 1706 called Wonders in the Sun, or Kingdom of the Birds. And it was a farcical comedic opera, and huge chunks of the play were actually depicted by actors in elaborate bird costumes. And the song is called In the Fields of Frost and Snow, and when you hear the In the Fields of Frost and Snow, it is very apparent that, like, oh yeah, this is where Old MacDonald came from, because essentially what it is it's from the perspective of a female human character talking about how she takes care of the animals on her father's farm.
In the fields in frost and snow, watching late and early, there I keep my father's cows, there I milk 'em yearly, mooing here, mooing there, here a moo, there a moo, everywhere a moo, we defy all care and strife in a charming country life.
there's other ones about sheep and about owls and turkeys and hens and ducks and swine. It is literally Old MacDonald Had a Farm with just slight melodic variations. And apparently the opera itself was a total flop and didn't really do very well. Apparently it closed after 5 performances in April 1706, but he was fond enough to include it in this compilation, and the song ended up taking on a life of its own and sort of became a folk song from its from its inclusion in this songbook. And people just started picking it up and tweaking the lyrics as folk songs typically do. And eventually it crossed the Atlantic over into the Americas and started taking on new characters, where all of a sudden there was Old Mississippi and Old MacDonald. And rather than being about, the farmer's daughter who is actually singing it, it becomes about the farmer himself and that farmer's name and all of the animals that he has. But what's gotten lost, and you'll often, if you look up the history of Old MacDonald, you'll see that it came from this opera. But I actually dug up the original song, and there are 2 verses in the middle. There's 2 verses where the female character who's singing it meets with her lover in the early morning hours, and they go all over the farm making noises of their own. And they're wooing here, wooing there, wooing everywhere. The song is about a farmer's daughter who takes care of her father's animals and then meets up with her lover and has sex all over the farm. That's what the song originally came from. And the fact that it came from an opera where the people get dressed up in bird costumes, Old MacDonald has its roots as the 18th century equivalent of an Elvis Presley movie song. And hey, I can say this. That opera closed after 5 performances, Double Trouble at least made its money back. Now, it's true, right? So that's where the history of the song came from. And I just wanted to ask people, when you think of it from the perspective of it was written for an opera and as a comedy song and ended up being transformed into a folk song that got spread amongst people and brought overseas, like many other great folk songs that have descended by immigrants into America. The problem with Old MacDonald is not that it's a children's song. The problem is that everyone else stopped thinking of it as a folk song and started viewing it as a children's song.
Yeah, even though its beginnings weren't quite so innocent.
Exactly. And yeah, I just wanted to bring attention to that history because I think, given the fact that it has this deep well of history behind it, and the fact that even once it did become a song more associated with children, you had artists as dignified as Frank Sinatra putting his own spin on it, as Ella Fitzgerald putting her spin on it, Nat King Cole putting his spin on it, even on an album for kids. Bo Diddley doing a version, putting his own spin on it.
Although I have to say, hey, Bo Diddley's way better than Elvis's version of Old MacDonald.
I think that this song has been wrongly maligned, even by Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
The idea that this was... let me ask you this, Gurdip. Is Old MacDonald inherently more silly than Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear? About wanting to be someone's stuffed animal?
I don't want to be a tiger, 'cause tigers play too rough. I don't want to be a lion, 'cause lions ain't the kind you love enough. I just want to be your teddy bear. Put a chain around my neck and leave me anywhere. Oh, let me be. Oh, let him be.
I think it's the way it's sung. It's a bit different.
What about Milk Cow Blues?
I can tell that old milk cow, I can tell the way she low. Now if you see my milk cow, he's a rapper on home. I ain't had no milk and butter since that cow's been gone.
Same thing. I mean, I think just the fact that it has this connotation of being a kid's silly song, and the fact that Elvis was recording these kind of songs in the 60s, I think a combination of all that plays into it. But like, I don't look at it any different than, say, Confidence.
Yeah.
I mean, there's really no difference between those songs.
As far as I'm concerned, I think there is a difference for me because it has all this history imbued in it. And I think that...
Well, just because someone else didn't sing Confidence.
Yeah. I mean, Confidence doesn't have the same deep, roots. I mean, really, there's no difference from a lot of hillbilly songs, compared to this, other than,
Sure.
like it came across the same way by immigrants spreading it. It just happened to be one of those songs that culturally, collectively, we all just decided, oh, this is a kid's song because the melody is simple and, it talks about animals and you can teach kids what sounds farm animals make. And, it became this sort of educational song, but it is not. Emphatically, it's not a children's song inherently. I will stand by. I'm going to start playing Old MacDonald loud and proud, and I'm not afraid to say.
You should, because there really, as you said, there really is no difference between this and, say, something like Teddy Bear. It's just the fact that people know in the 50s Elvis was cool. He sang Teddy Bear. He looked cool singing it. Cut to Double Trouble, Elvis in the back of the truck making
and that's
weird
fair.
gestures.
Doesn't look cool doing it,
No.
but musically, I respected the lineage of Old MacDonald after having dug into it. And the last thing I'll say is that there are a couple quotes, one from Randy Starr, his second quote from Writing with the King, and he says, "I love the fact that Old MacDonald is often cited by people as the absolute worst of Presley's recordings. Aside from Kissing Cousins, Old MacDonald has probably earned more royalties for me over the years than any of my other Presley songs. The fact that I wrote the music and lyrics means it's doubly good for me." And the last quote is often attributed to 19th century English writer Samuel Butler, but is occasionally also attributed to Thomas Durfee. It's probably more likely that it was Samuel Butler, but it doesn't really matter which of the two, because I think the sentiment sums up Old MacDonald and all the arguments about, the king of rock and roll shouldn't have been doing fucking Old MacDonald had a farm. Well, here's the quote. "All animals, except man, know that the principal business of life is to enjoy it."
Well, I'm gonna have a farm someday, E-I-E-I-O, and I'll do things MacDonald's way, E-I-E-I-O, with a cluck here, a cluck there, a moo here, a moo there, and a whack here, and a whack there, and I can promise you, those animals ever get out of line, we'll have a mulligan stew. So how about you?
You gave people a lot to think about, but I don't think you're going to change people's minds.
I don't expect to change people's minds, but I do expect them to walk away with a better understanding of the history of the song.
Sure, that's all you can do.
And to not view it as somehow beneath Elvis Presley. Like, Elvis inherently was a ridiculous artist. Like, we know that. We know that, like, he wore the spangly jumpsuits. We know that he sang songs like Teddy Bear and Hound Dog, which Hound Dog is literally, like, changed from the Big Mama version to be literally about a dog who can't catch a rabbit. Like, like, the intensity of it is what sells it, but the lyrical content is a parody. It is a dumb song. It just happens to be performed so brilliantly.
Yeah, bro.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool. Awesome.
That's my song.
I'm glad that you shed light on that, so good pick.
Yeah, that's my song.
So let's go to another classic song from Elvis.
Gurdip, what was your song of the week?
I picked What Every Woman Lives For, 1966, from the film Frankie and Johnny.
She may say she needs fancy bangles and beads. That's part of a woman's plan. But what every woman lives for, what every woman lives for, is to give her love to a man.
This came up as one of your least favorite Elvis songs back in the day. It was written by, now get this, Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann, which right away I got to ask, WTF? I never realized that they wrote this. Did you know this?
Oh, yeah. When you pointed it out, I was like, oh, God, yeah, they did, huh? Like, I think I had noticed it on liner notes, but I don't think it had sunk in the implication of that.
Yeah, that's just weird. We just released that Potluck Pod a few weeks back, and I'm basically slobbering all over their songs. claiming them to be like gods amongst Elvis songwriters, and then you come to find out they wrote this, and you're like, what? Yeah.
Again, we're talking Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann, A Mess of Blues, Teenager in Love, his latest Flame.
There Goes My Baby.
It's a Long, Lonely Highway. Kiss Me Quick. Brilliant. I mean, Save the Last Dance for Me by the Drifters, which is an iconic recording.
Yeah. So, I was talking to you the other day, talk about Misfire. So the musical tracks for this were recorded in the early hours of May 14th, 1965 at Radio Recorder Studio B in Hollywood, when Elvis had already left, and then he would come back the next day to lay down the vocal track, which is weird because he did that the same thing for the song that you had. And then I guess technically it would be the same day because he came back on the 14th. But anyway, this song, so we've talked about those Frankie and Johnny recordings in the past, but man, that quality is really horrible. I don't know where it went wrong. Like, was it the mastering or the actual recordings themselves? Like, Elvis just sounds flat, not dynamic at all. The music is uninspired. But the real crime of the song is this incredibly sexist lyrics. Like, I'm not gonna claim to be the most liberal modern guy out there. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, but man, when I first heard this, I was like, seriously? Essentially, the song is saying a woman's only worth is to give some dude her love. Like, in the lyrics, he doesn't even have to look good. You'll just give him your love because that's a woman's job. Like, are you kidding me?
Wise men have known women can't live alone. So a woman should understand that what every woman lives for, what every woman lives for, is to give her love to a man.
Like, these are the dudes that wrote like She's Not You, his latest Flame, Little Sister, but thinking about those, aren't the women looked down upon on those songs as well?
A little bit, yeah.
Like, am I picking up a theme here?
Product of their era.
What do you think about this song?
There's a reason why it was on my least favorite Elvis songs list and will continue to be forever. This, I think, is actually the worst song Elvis Presley ever recorded. You can even go to bat for a song musically like Woman Without Love from the 70s, which thematically is kind of similar.
Yeah.
But there's enough there with Jerry Chestnut as a songwriter that, like, melodically you can say, well, if he had rewritten the lyrics, which apparently he did at some point later on, it could have been salvaged. But there is absolutely nothing salvageable in this song. It is recorded badly. It is performed badly. The sentiments are bad. And here's the thing about Frankie and Johnny, because usually I will make the case of movie songs like, oh, is there a character reason? Because you can imagine a situation where it's like, oh, well, it's a movie set in the early 20th century. Maybe it's a satirical thing. Like, the character is just being so over the top of how much he has this belief that, the only thing a woman can live for is to give her love to a man. No, that's not how it's presented in the narrative of the film at all.
No.
It's not. So you can't even give that excuse for Pomus and Schumann to write this shit.
Yeah.
This is, hands down, the absolute worst Elvis Presley song that he ever recorded. And, yeah, I love that you dug up that, like, this is from Pomus and Schumann, the people who gave him, like, Viva Las Vegas.
Gold.
Yeah.
I guess the only positive thing you can say the song has
it
going
ends?
for it is, besides that, like, he sounds okay in it. I mean, he would have sounded better if the final mix was good, but really, there really isn't, as you said, any kind of saving grace. They did six. They did 6 tracks of just the instrumental, with 6 being the master, and then they did another 8 of the vocals. 8 is considered the master. None of the other takes have been released, which all I can say is good. The song was released on the Frankie and Johnny soundtrack in April of '66, and then again on that awesome Pickwick re-release of '76.
Oh yeah.
Strangely, they didn't leave that song out, but they did leave other songs like Chessay off that one. I don't know why. Have you seen the back of that Pickwick album?
Oh, yeah.
It's like more images of Elvis in concert in the
It's ugly.
70s. It's like, what? So if you're in the mood, you can check out Elvis' performance song in the film Frankie and Johnny in that restaurant scene. Obviously, the girls who are swooning over him, they're not actually listening to his lyrics, are they? Because they're all like happy. He's pretty much insulting them.
Granted, like it's fictional, so they're directed to look, give that classic Elvis movie. Oh shucks, he's singing to me. Isn't he just the greatest?
Yeah, he could be like singing, "You're dumb, you're an idiot. Why are you listening?" And they're all smiling. No covers to this. I guess no other artists really want to touch this song. If they were to ever release Elvis Sings Pomus and Schumann, do you think they would leave the song out?
I think there was a Pomus Schumann, wasn't there?
I don't know. I know they left certain songs out of the Elvis Sings Lieber and Staller. So
let me look. I'm just going to dig this up. Elvis Sings Pomus and Schumann. Yeah, 1985 in Europe. There was. Okay. Holy fuck, it's on there. It's on the backside of the album, almost like it's right in the middle of, because on the B-side you've got Doing the Best I Can, Double Trouble, Long Lonely Highway, Never Say Yes, and then What Every Woman Lives For, and then You'll Think of Me, followed by a few alternate takes of some other songs. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I guess they didn't care. They're like, whatever. Or they didn't listen to it.
We can't even give it it was a different time. No, it's just a bad song, a bad sentiment, bad place in the movie, doesn't fit narratively. It doesn't even have that satirical argument that you could make, if it went even more over the top, and like the female characters were getting angry or something, it doesn't even have that.
No, they're swooning over this.
This is meant to like make them love him.
Yeah. That's what they live for, is to give their love to him.
'Cause what every woman lives for, what every woman lives for, is to give her love to a man. And I hope that man is me.
Johnny likes her. Maybe it'll be one big happy triangle, and I'll come out on the right side.
So, yeah, old MacDonald doesn't sound so bad now, does it?
There you go. See, I propped up your song, even though people probably don't like that either. But yeah, that was my song of the week. So now you don't have to pick it.
I love it. No, I'm sure we'll get emails of people going, "Why are you wasting your time on songs like this?" Well, again, like we got to get through them eventually.
Well, if you do want to email about these songs and you do want to email about our topic, how can they do that?
TCBcast@gmail.com. Or, of course, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And if you want to hear more stuff from us, like that Buddy Holly jukebox episode, how can they do that?
You can support the show at patreon.com/TCBcast.
And we're back. We are back into a regular groove now.
Yes.
So look forward to listening to more new episodes coming out in the next few weeks coming up. So all I can say is it's a hot time in Florida.
And a rainy night in Georgia.
You've been listening to the TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis fan podcast. Justin Gosman and Gurdip Ladar have left the building.
Someone must have stomped on his head with those blue suede shoes.
Thank you and good night.